The farmer protests have been one of the most important and most discussed issues in recent politics. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about how our economy treats farmers, how capitalism exploits farmers and the environment, and how environmental damage impacts farmers and the working class much before it impacts anyone else. So, since this is my first video, I don't know exactly who my target audience is. So, I want to start from the very basics. What is capitalism? What is socialism? So, capitalism is basically an economic system where the means of production, distribution, and exchange are owned by private parties, and these private companies compete amongst each other in each industry. So, what would be an example of this? Let's take agriculture. Suppose the wheat fields, the tractors used to transport this wheat, the mandis and the your local retail stores which are used to exchange and sell these goods. If all of these are owned by individual private parties, then that is capitalism. What is socialism? Socialism is a system that is built upon the idea of collectivization. Suppose the means of production, distribution, and exchange are owned by the workers themselves collectively, and decisions relating to these things are taken democratically, and that would be an example of socialism. What is the problem with capitalism? Capitalism is profit driven, and when it's profit driven, we basically ignore what is called externalities. Suppose you and me make a business deal, we are not concerned about the welfare of a third person. So as far as the rich capitalist class who conduct most of the business are concerned, climate change is an externality. And if you watch the movie Parasite, you will find this scene very interesting. Climate change is symbolically represented through heavy rains. The heavy rains impact the poor family much more drastically than it impacts the rich family. The poor family is absolutely devastated by this. Meanwhile, the rich family at first feels a minor inconvenience because their camping trip is cancelled due to the rains. But the next day, the rich woman even remarks that the heavy rains cleared up the sky for their birthday party the next day. So, why does capitalism have to be profit driven? Why aren't there any ethical capitalists? Well, the simple answer is that they'd fail. Imagine a football match where only one team has to follow the rules. Any ethical capitalist would eventually fail. So they'll also have to resort to the kind of exploitation that the other capitalists are using. So in capitalism, it is perfectly rational for individuals to make profit their sole goal. But what is rational for an individual might not be rational for society as a whole. I'll give you another example of this. During an economic crisis, individual capitalists will prefer to fire some of their employees, downsize their companies to save them. But at the same time, when all capitalists do this together, there is huge unemployment in the economy, and nobody has any money to buy anything. So demand drops, and that drives you into further economic crisis. So what is rational for the individual might not be rational for society as a whole. Let's come back to climate change. How bad is climate change exactly? A study called The Future of the Human Climate Niche, published in the National Academy of Sciences, found that by 2070, 3.5 billion people would have to face unlivable temperatures. This is 30% of the expected population by then. Basically, the calculation is this. Currently, 1% of the Earth's landmass has mean annual temperatures above 29 degrees, and most of that is in the Sahara and other deserts, so it doesn't really matter to us. But the mean annual temperature of the Earth is expected to increase by 3 degrees. This will result in 19% of the landmass of the Earth having a mean annual temperature over 29 degrees, and this 19% of the landmass will be home to 3.5 billion people. Now let's take the example of industrial agriculture to see how capitalism damages workers and the environment.
It's important to remember that about a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions come from food production. Of this, 58% comes from meat production, but that's a topic for another day. The rest come from plant-based industrial agriculture.
So, one of the key features of industrial agriculture is the large scale single crop farming of genetically modified plants. The problem with raising a single crop, or maybe two or three, with poor crop rotation is that pests and weeds are suddenly much more dangerous. A pest or weed that is specific to your crop could destroy your entire harvest. And when you use more pesticides, it has been well documented that pests develop pesticide resistance. And once these pests develop pesticide resistance, you'll have to use more pesticide. You may have to use a different kind of pesticide that may attack the same pest in a different way. And then this causes a vicious cycle of pesticide resistance and using more pesticide. Another problem with single crops and poor crop rotation is that it will force you to use more chemical fertilizer. If you had better crop rotation, you would have at your disposal better methods of fertilizing your soil naturally. These chemicals easily seep into nearby water bodies, and obviously farmers and their families are the first ones to be impacted by this. Another problem with pesticides is that they kill useful pollinators, and pollinators are an important part of preserving ecological balance. So a simple thing like pollinators being destroyed could upset the entire balance of the nearby ecology. Let's look at how industrial farming directly impacts farmers. Genetically modified plants are patented, and huge corporations own the patents to these seeds. So farmers, instead of using the seed from their own produce every season, will have to buy them again and again. Further, this push for using more pesticide, herbicides and chemical fertilizers will mean that a huge part of what they earn will be spent on these raw materials. This means a much smaller profit for the farmer. So why then do we use this inefficient and dangerous mode of production? In the 90s, there was a push from powerful first world countries, especially the US, through international organizations to liberalize economies in third world countries. This included India. The argument was that economic liberalization increases production, and the trickle down effects would mean less poverty rates and better food security for India when we're talking about agriculture. So has this worked? I'll read you an excerpt from the conclusion of a paper called Indian Agriculture and Economic Reforms. Over the period of economic reform, agricultural growth rates slowed down significantly. Most importantly, the rate of growth of food grain production slowed down and fell behind population growth rates for the first time after independence. The per capita food grain availability fell from 175 kg in 1992 to 163 kg in 2001. In a country where about half the children below the age of 3 are underweight and more than 3/4 of children aged 6 to 35 months are anemic, the reduction in per capita food grain availability after 1991 has deeply worrisome implications. The spate of farmer suicides reported from certain parts of the country reflects the distress of agriculture after 1991. Between 1997 and 2006, there were about 150,000 suicides by farmers in rural India. Since economic liberalization has clearly not given us the desired results, why then don't we try to change? Why do we dive deeper and deeper into liberalization? The answer is pretty obvious from the numbers. Just look at the genetically modified seed industry. 61% of the industry is owned by just 3 corporations: Monsanto, DuPont and Syngenta. These huge corporations monopolize industries. They fund election campaigns of politicians. They spend millions and millions on lobbying, and they make sure that policymakers make policies in their favor. Another successful tactic that they've used is spreading the myth of the ever-growing human population and the threat of world hunger. Hans Rosling, a Swedish physician and epidemiologist, explains how the world population is expected to saturate at 11 billion, and there is no way we can stop it from reaching that number. Most of the world has adopted the two-child policy. The only countries which are yet to do so are in Africa, and the reason they're still having a bigger number of children per family is because the survival rate of children in these countries are very less, so they usually have a larger number of children to compensate for this, and in turn when they have a larger number of children it's harder to sustain them and the survival rate is lesser again. Third world hunger is not caused by a lack of food either, it's caused by a lack of income. Economic liberalization has only increased the inequalities in these countries. It has only increased the exploitation of the poorer classes of society in these third world countries. Just look at this excerpt from an article called "A Rational Agriculture is Incompatible with Capitalism" by Fred Magdoff, a professor emeritus of plant and soil science at the University of Vermont and a political commentator. There are still plenty of hungry people amidst all the abundance and waste of food. If the purpose of capitalist agriculture was to grow food in order to feed people, there could be no hunger in the United States. However, well over 40 million people are considered food insecure. This is in a country that literally grows more food than it knows what to do with. Even in countries such as India, food is exported at the same time that people are hungry. As a Wall Street Journal headline put it in 2004, an Indian paradox, bumper harvests and rising hunger. The scourge of hunger and malnourished people occurs in most countries around the world. There is no right to food, although like clean air and water, it is an essential good needed by everyone. Rather, it is a commodity just like any other, and if you do not have the money to buy it in sufficient quantity or quality, then you will have to get what you can from a charity group or government program. One of the irrationalities of the food system as a whole is the immense waste that occurs, estimated to be about 1/3 of the food produced in the United States. A good part of this waste is at a household level, throwing away of food that usually ends up in landfills. However, a significant amount also occurs when farmers have more crops than they can sell, or when their produce does not meet the standards demanded by retailers for size and condition. According to a 2012 report by the Natural Resources Defense Council, one large cucumber farmer estimated that fewer than half the vegetables he grows actually leave his farm, and that 75% of cucumbers culled before sale are edible. Additional waste occurs during processing and in the retail sector. Markets would rather have their shelves fully stocked as an indication of abundance than look sparsely provisioned. They simply toss out what spoils. While some waste is probably unavoidable, much of the waste of food in the United States occurs because of the irrationalities built into the system. Just look at this table based on two studies, one in 2012 to 2013 financial year and one from the 2005 to 2007 financial year. Look at the amount of wastage that happens to different crops in India. The US is widely considered one of the best countries in the world. How can their model be so wrong? Why don't we hear more about these irrationalities? The reason is that most of modern economics is dominated by what is called neoclassical economics. So this kind of economics is obsessed with GDP and HDI. But it has been found time and again that both these things are tied to an increase in production and also correlate with environmental damage. This is where the Sustainable Development Index comes in. It accounts for factors like life expectancy, expected years of schooling, but also environmental factors such as CO2 emissions per capita, material footprint per capita. So, sorting by this criteria, which country do you think will perform best in the world? Cuba. Yes, the tiny socialist island nation performs the best according to this criteria. All this brings us to the issue at hand, farmer protests in India. The farmer protests remind me of a quote by Noam Chomsky. That's the standard technique of privatization. Defund, make sure things won't work, people get angry, you hand it over to private capital. Isn't this exactly what is happening here right now? Farmers were already frustrated and angry with the existing system. We were in the middle of a huge agrarian crisis already, and the government used this opportunity to hand over control to giant corporations. So, what exactly is happening here? Currently, farmers trade with APMC or government controlled mandis or markets. But the problem is that only 6,000 APMC mandis exist across all of India. Another important term in this is MSP or minimum support price. It is a minimum price that is guaranteed by the government to support farmers. But the problem is that MSP was only guaranteed for a few crops. So that is when the farm laws came in. The farm laws mainly do a few things. The first one is allow farmers to sell to private parties outside of the APMC mandis. The next is allow contract farming with little to no protection. The problem here is that there is no law mandating that there should be a written agreement or a written contract, and there is not many options for a farmer to settle dispute, because by this new law it is specified that you cannot go to court over disputes over contracts. At max, you can go to a subdivisional magistrate. The next point is that private mandis are not mandated to provide an MSP. So it is pretty clear from these things what is going to happen. Private mandis will at first attract farmers with lower prices, and once they've eliminated the government mandis, they will slowly drive up the prices. And the next most discussed issue with the farm laws is that it allows hoarding of farm produce. So rich capitalists can basically now outcompete the government mandis, and once the farmers are at the mercy of the private mandis, they can hoard and manipulate prices to drive up their profits. P. Sainath, a reputed journalist and an expert in rural India, called this a move towards corporatization and not just privatization. According to central trade unions, 25 crore workers joined the protest. So let's look at a quick summary of all this. Capitalist agriculture is full of irrationalities. There is huge wastage and growing hunger at the same time. There is environmental damage which is justified by the need for more production, but we don't really need more production. What we need is more equitable distribution. So what solutions do we have in front of us? Firstly, we must as a society concentrate more on equitable distribution and not higher production. There should be a central planning of our resources. We should increase government spending in agricultural research and development, which has been gradually decreased from the economic reforms of the 90s. We should invest more in research on organic farming. We should have a larger diversity of crops in agricultural lands. We should end patents for genetically modified seeds, since most of the research that is required to produce these seeds happens in public institutions anyway. There should be a strong farmer and agricultural worker union across the country. They must exert direct democratic control over the industry. We are seeing very positive changes in this light across the country. Finally, revolutions can happen. They are not as impractical as we often think. In the 90s, huge radical changes were made in economic policies towards liberalization. If the US can exert their pressure in a third world country and make such huge radical changes towards liberalization, then workers in the country can similarly protest, use democracy to exert pressure on the government to make radical changes in the opposite direction. Since I've had to cover a lot of ground in this video, I wasn't able to provide a lot of statistics and information in the video. So I will be linking all my sources in the description. You can go and check it out. You can fact check my points, and you can read the articles that I give in the description if you want to educate yourself more on this topic. I hope that you will share this video and also support the farmer movements that are happening in India right now.